My mom screamed, "You're nothing but a leech," then threw my bags outside and told me to leave. I walked away without a word. 3 weeks later, my dad called in a panic. "Why are all our accounts frozen?" I calmly replied, "Maybe you should ask the leech." "Hello everyone, my name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 36 years old, and the last thing my mother ever called me before throwing me out of the house was, Leech." She screamed it so loudly the neighbors came outside. "You've been living off us for years." Then she grabbed my suitcase, opened the front door, and threw it onto the driveway. Dad stood in the hallway, watching, saying absolutely nothing. I quietly walked outside, picked up my bags, loaded them into my car, looked back at the only home I'd known for 6 years, then simply said, "I hope one day you understand." Mom laughed. "Oh, don't worry. We'll be just fine without you." 3 weeks later, Dad called me 23 times before I finally answered. His voice was shaking. "Lauren, our bank accounts are frozen. The mortgage payment didn't go through. The insurance company says we're behind. The electricity company is threatening disconnection. What did you do?" I calmly answered, "Maybe you should ask the leech." Looking back, none of this started with one argument. It started years earlier, when my father suffered a stroke. It wasn't severe. Thankfully, he recovered well enough to walk and speak. But managing paperwork became difficult. Numbers confused him. Deadlines slipped by. Mom hated dealing with finances. She'd always admitted it. "I don't understand banking." I never have. At the time, I was already working as a certified public accountant. Helping people organize finances was literally my career, so helping my parents seemed natural. Every weekend, I'd stop by, pay bills, review insurance statements, prepare tax documents, renew licenses, handle investments, organize medical paperwork. Eventually, one weekend became every weekend. Then, every evening. When Dad's health declined further, I moved back home, not because they demanded it, because I wanted them safe. I kept my own apartment for several months, but eventually, paying 2 rents made no sense, so I gave it up. Mom insisted, "Save your money. This is your home too." I believed her. For 6 years, I quietly handled almost every financial responsibility, not by paying everything myself, but by making sure everything happened. Bills were paid, taxes filed, mortgage transferred, insurance renewed, medical claims submitted, automatic payments monitored, investment paperwork updated. Dad often smiled, "We'd be lost without you." Mom usually nodded. I don't know how people keep track of all this. Neither did I. Not anymore. It had become automatic, like brushing my teeth. Then, my younger brother Brandon moved back home after losing another job. He'd always been charming, confident, the type of person who blamed everyone except himself. According to Brandon, every boss was unfair, every landlord unreasonable, every failed business idea was someone else's fault. Mom adored him. He's just had bad luck. Within weeks, things changed. Brandon constantly complained, "Lauren doesn't pay rent." I quietly answered, "I also manage the entire household." He laughed, "That's not a real contribution." Mom didn't defend me. She simply stayed quiet. Then Brandon started asking questions. How much money do Mom and Dad actually have? What accounts exist? Who's controlling everything? I immediately answered, "Your parents know exactly where everything is." He smirked, "Do they?" That question stayed with me. One evening, Dad quietly pulled me aside. "I've noticed Brandon asking about bank passwords." "I know. It worries me, so change them." I smiled. "They're your accounts. You should decide." He nodded. "I trust you." A week later, Brandon announced he'd finally found a stable job. Everyone celebrated. Mom hugged him. "I knew you'd figure it out." Then she looked at me. "Maybe now you'll finally start contributing." I frowned. "What do you mean? Rent? Utilities? Groceries?" I stared at her. "I already buy groceries every week." She shrugged. "You'd buy them wherever you lived." Brandon laughed. "And you live here for free." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad looked uncomfortable, but stayed silent. Again, over the following month, Brandon repeated the same story so often. Mom eventually believed it. "Lauren lives here for free. Lauren contributes nothing. Lauren controls our money. Lauren thinks she's smarter than everyone." One Saturday morning, I returned from grocery shopping. The bags were still in my hands. Mom stood in the living room, arms crossed, Brandon beside her. Dad sat quietly in his chair. "We need to talk." I set the groceries on the counter. "Okay." Mom pointed toward the hallway. "Your bags are packed." I blinked. "What?" "You've been taking advantage of us long enough." "I have, yes. You've lived here rent-free. You've controlled our finances. You've acted like this house belongs to you." Brandon smiled. "I told you she'd pretend to be confused." I looked at Dad. Dad? He opened his mouth, then looked down. I don't want to argue. That hurt more than anything Mom had said. She grabbed my suitcase, marched to the front door, then screamed, "You're nothing but a leech." She threw my luggage onto the driveway. "Get out." The neighbors looked over their fences. I quietly walked outside, picked up my bags, then returned to the doorway one last time. "I'll leave." Mom folded her arms. "Good. But before I go, everything connected to me ends today." She laughed. "What does that even mean?" I simply smiled. "You'll find out." I drove away, checked into a small extended stay hotel, and spent the weekend moving into a new apartment. I never called. I never argued. I never asked to come back. 3 weeks passed. Life slowly became peaceful again. Then, at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning, my phone exploded with missed calls. "Dad, again, again, again," 23 times. Finally, I answered. Before I could say hello, Dad shouted, "Lauren, our accounts are frozen. The mortgage payment failed. The insurance company says there's a problem. The bank won't tell us anything. What did you do?" I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and quietly answered, "Maybe. You should ask this Leech." Silence. Then Dad whispered, "I don't understand. Sometimes, the person everyone thinks is the problem is quietly holding everything together. The moment they leave, the truth doesn't arrive with anger. It arrives with unpaid bills, unanswered questions, and consequences no one saw coming." Dad's voice trembled through the phone. "Lauren, I don't understand." I took a slow breath. "I know. That's the problem. What did you do?" "I didn't freeze your accounts. I couldn't. They're not mine." Silence. Then I quietly continued. "But I did remove myself from everything that depended on me." He sounded confused. "What does that mean?" "It means, when Mom threw me out, I resigned as your financial power of attorney." He stopped breathing for a second. "You, what?" I filed the paperwork the next morning. I also notified the bank that I was no longer authorized to manage your finances. Dad whispered, "So that's why they won't talk to me." "No, they won't talk to me either. I'm no longer listed. They're waiting for you to complete the paperwork yourself." He sounded completely overwhelmed. "But I don't know how." "I know." 3 hours later, Dad called again. This time his voice was calmer. "Can I come see you?" I agreed. When he arrived at my apartment, he looked exhausted. In one hand, he carried a folder stuffed with unopened letters. In the other, a notebook I'd bought him years earlier. Every password, every account number, every payment schedule, everything I'd carefully organized. He placed it on my kitchen table. "I never realized how much you actually did." I opened the notebook. Every page was in my handwriting. Color-coded tabs, emergency contacts, insurance renewals, tax deadlines, investment statements, mortgage reminders, medical billing notes. Dad slowly sat down. "I thought all those things just happened." I smiled sadly. "No, someone made them happen." He lowered his eyes. "And that someone was you." For the first time, he truly understood. A few minutes later, Mom arrived. She didn't knock. Dad had given her my address. The moment she walked inside, she looked around the apartment. Simple furniture, moving boxes, a small dining table. "You really left?" I nodded. "You told me to." She looked uncomfortable. "We've had a terrible 3 weeks." I quietly replied, "I believe you." She took a deep breath. "The bank manager explained everything. He said you voluntarily removed yourself from every authorization." "Yes." "Why?" I couldn't believe she was asking. "You called me a leech. You threw me out. You made it very clear I wasn't part of your household anymore. So I stopped acting like I was." She looked at the floor. "I didn't think." "I know. You didn't." Dad slowly opened the folder. Inside were notices from the bank, the mortgage company, the insurance provider. None of the accounts had been permanently frozen. Instead, several transactions had been temporarily paused because no authorized person had completed updated identity verification after my removal. Automatic payments tied to my authorization had stopped. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had disappeared. Everything simply required the account owners to take over their own responsibilities. Dad looked at me. "Can you fix it?" I shook my head. "I can teach you, but I'm not taking control again." Mom frowned. "Why not?" "Because next time we disagree, I don't want anyone saying I controlled your money." Neither of them argued, because they finally understood. For the next several days, I sat beside my parents at the bank. Not behind them, beside them. The banker patiently explained every account, every signature, every online password, every payment schedule. When the meeting ended, Dad smiled. "I actually understand our finances now." The banker laughed. Your daughter organized everything so well that learning it was much easier. Dad looked at me. I never appreciated that. I smiled. You do now. A week later, Brandon came to my apartment. He stood awkwardly outside. I owe you an apology. I crossed my arms. I'm listening. He sighed. I kept telling Mom you weren't doing anything. I honestly believed it. What changed? He laughed bitterly. I spent one afternoon trying to organize Dad's paperwork. I gave up after 2 hours. For the first time, I laughed too. It's harder than it looks. He nodded. You weren't living off them. They were depending on you. Yes, I was. He looked ashamed. I should have seen that. Epilogue. Soft piano becomes warm and hopeful, carrying the quiet peace that comes when respect finally replaces assumptions. 2 years have passed. My parents still manage their own finances. Dad proudly pays every bill himself. Sometimes, he calls me with questions, not because he expects me to take over, because he wants to learn. Mom has apologized more than once, not with grand speeches. With small actions, she thanks people now, especially those whose work happens quietly behind the scenes. Brandon kept his promise. He found steady employment, and for the first time in his life, he started contributing to the household instead of criticizing everyone else. As for me, I never moved back. I built a peaceful life of my own, one based on respect instead of obligation. Sometimes Dad jokes, "We used to think our accountant lived in the house." I laugh. You did. It just happened to be your daughter. My thoughts. Looking back, my mother didn't really believe I was a leech. She believed invisible work had no value because she never saw it happening. The truth is, some of the most important people in our lives do their work so quietly that we only notice it when it stops. Respect isn't about recognizing loud achievements. It's about appreciating the steady, unseen effort that keeps a family moving forward. Sometimes, the greatest lesson isn't learning how much someone was doing. It's realizing it before they're gone.